Ladies and gentlemen, a really, really warm welcome to all of you tonight. It's I think 9 days before Christmas, if I got that right, and it's just wonderful to see such a big roll-up. My chair, Lee Clifford, who's here with me tonight somewhere, always says he wants not just a well-executed event, but he wants a box office success, and I think, Lee, we've delivered tonight. It's great to have some very special guests with us here tonight for the launch of A Step to the Right, the life and times of Alexander Downer. We have former members of Parliament Greg Hunt, David Kemp, Alan Tudge, Robert Menzies Institute board members Stephen Minns, Tim Lynch, of course Lee Clifford, who I mentioned, our great supporter Charles Kiefel. It's great that you're here. Our Parrot Club members, our members and friends, thank you one and all. Before we move on to the launch though, I think it's important to mention that we all come here tonight with a very, very heavy heart. Like most of you, no doubt last night, you were probably getting into the festive spirit, whether it was Christmas or Hanukkah. This is the time of year when we come together with family and friends and start reflecting on the joy of the year and the joy of family and our community in this great country. In our case, my mum and dad were staying, so we took the kids out to see Handel's Messiah at the Arts Centre. Amazing evening of music and of course the celebration of the Christmas story. But we're filing out of the hall at about 7:30 and we turn on our phones to a deluge of text messages from our family overseas, wondering what on earth is happening in Bondi. We're still wondering what's happening in Bondi, by the way. What's happened to our wonderful, peaceful, liberal democracy, our tolerant country, a country that for years, for decades, for hundreds of years now, has been a tolerant and welcoming country for migrants from across the world, but particularly a safe place for Jewish migrants fleeing persecution. We can't say today that Australia is a safe place for Jewish people, and as Josh Frydenberg, who's here tonight as our guest speaker, wrote so powerfully in The Australian today, we can't say that anymore. And as an Australian, as a proud Australian, I'm deeply ashamed of that fact. Last night, Australia changed, and I think if we want our tolerant, freedom-loving Australia back, we need to be extremely honest that this will take a huge collective effort from the top down, from political leadership down, where we've seen a huge vacuum, but from our institutions, from our schools, from our universities, politics obviously, to the media, our cultural institutions like here at the Robert Menzies Institute. We have to rid these places of the scourge of that ancient hatred, anti-Semitism, that's bubbled and boiled over since October 7th. To my Jewish friends here tonight, of course, Josh, you're welcome, you're supported, you're loved, and you're one of us. It's an honour to have Josh here, the former Treasurer of Australia, a true friend, to launch A Step to the Right, the new biography of Australia's longest-serving Prime Minister, the youngest leader of the Federal Liberal Party, and of course my dad. Tonight's a genuinely confusing clash of the professional and the personal. It's a biography about the career of my father, of course, but because it's a biography about a former leader of the Liberal Party, it's a biography of someone who carried the legacy of Robert Menzies, the man whose legacy we honour here at the Robert Menzies Institute. And as a family member, it's always curious to read what other people think of your parents, of your father. I mean, let's be honest, usually a little bit disastrous. No, we are so honoured that that the brilliant Tony Parkinson took up the mantle with Josh's great encouragement and the support of many generous people, some of whom are here tonight. Tony took up the mantle of writing this biography, much awaited biography. Tony has a unique insight into Dad because he suffered for years as one of his media advisors, but he also was a journalist in his own right and a great international editor. And he wrote a biography of Jeff Kennett. So from one political giant to another. Both very larger-than-life personalities and with a Twitter feed that occasionally gets them into trouble. What you'll find incredibly, I think incredible when you read this book, and thank you for basically selling us out, that's great, that will, pay for the pay rises next year, thank you. You're reminded how consequential the Howard era was. On Saturday, Dad and I and some others, David Kemp included, attended the Fraser Symposium celebrating, and I think most in this room would have celebrated the 50th anniversary of the election of the Fraser government on the 13th of December 1975. In March, the 11th of March, I think I'm right, the 11th of March next year we'll celebrate the 30th anniversary of the election of the Howard government. And it's incredible to think that it's been 30 years since then. The jubilation of that night in 1996 when I was 16 years old in Dad's electorate office in Stirling, I'll never forget it because we'd had so many years of, Dad had never been in government. He was elected in an election that the Fraser government lost. And so this was a jubilant moment, but also the beginning of such a consequential era for Australian foreign policy, Australia's economy, and our way of life more broadly. As Dad's oldest child, as I said, I was 16. And Richard Alston, lovely to see you here tonight. As the oldest child of Dad's children, I certainly was a witness as a family member, but because I was a bit older, I was able to be a bit of a participant in some of the journey he had as Foreign Minister. When I was backpacking in the United States, I was able to meet up with him in Washington, DC. And you'd be surprised to hear I'm a US politics junkie. Anyway, Dad said, would you like to come and meet Colin Powell? I'm like, you bet. Those US politicians, they are so charming. They just ooze it. And anyway, Dad duly introduces, little Georgina, or little young Georgina as I was, 21 or so. And Secretary Powell was just, effusive and delightful and said, let me take you on a tour of the State Department. I'm like, this is great, thank you. Love that. Toured around the State Department and we got the official photo, and then I was given it as a memento to take home, and I was thrilled, and I looked at it and it said, Dear Georgiana. I said, don't worry, Dad, I'll change my name just so it's right. That was great. Libby got a photo with the Pope, but, I got Colin Powell. Part of that journey, a big part of the journey of Dad's career as Foreign Minister, and as family, you're part of it. The people in the office become your family. We were really lucky that Dad had this energetic, enthusiastic, a brilliant advisor, total Energizer bunny from 1999 to 2003 in Josh Frydenberg. Josh had that first-hand experience over the Howard government that this biography covers, because of course he goes into John Howard's office in 2003 to 2005. And the thing with Josh is he was not going to let any moment pass without it being photographed. I can see Brad and Greg and Dave nodding. This was before the smartphone, of course, 99 to 2003. And I think there were digital cameras, but technology wasn't really Josh's thing. He liked the disposables. And he would buy disposable after disposable after disposable camera. And every moment of any trip, it was Alexander, photo. He basically became a member of the press pack, such was his devotion to the photography of this political life and political experience. But as a family, we were so grateful that Dad had someone like Josh Frydenberg to advise him. Whenever there was a tough moment, you had Josh by your side. He was endlessly positive, warm, a heart bigger than Texas. It was when he left the office to go to John Howard, we were devastated. I mean, he did say it was the Prime Minister, but, our hearts broke. But Josh was like a brother to me, and I moved to Melbourne in 1998 as a uni student here in this building, as a law student. And as soon as Josh came into Dad's office, he said, my mum and Dad live around the corner. You don't have any family here. They'll have you around for, Shabbos dinner on Friday nights. And so I became a sort of de facto member of the Frydenberg family. It was marvellous. But that's the Josh way. He's a big-hearted guy. And I know he loved working for Dad, and he didn't want Dad's contribution to the foreign policy of this country, the reputation of this country, and the incredibly consequential things that the Howard government was able to do during those almost 12 years. He didn't want those things to be lost. And so I think he's done a great service to all of us in making sure that Tony has written this biography and supporting this project. And I'd like to ask him to say a few words to you tonight. Thank you, Josh.
Well, thank you, Georgina. When we were thinking, Tony and I, of somewhere to launch this book, we were a bit short of change, so we thought, who would not charge us for the event? And asking Alexander and Nikki's daughter was one sure way of getting that outcome. We all know the Downer name is synonymous with the history of our great party and the success of our great country. Alexander, and we'll get to him, as Foreign Minister and as leader of the party, his father as a minister in the Menzies government, and his grandfather as one of the founding fathers of our nation and as Premier of South Australia. So it's not too late before Georgina Downer joins the House of Representatives. But in truth, Georgina, in every way, maybe not in elected politics just yet, but you have continued the best of the Downer tradition. And what you have done with your board and with your staff here at the Menzies Centre is defend the ideas, the values, the legacy of the founder of the Liberal Party, the great Sir Robert Menzies. So thank you for what you have done. There could be no more important time for these ideas to permeate amongst these halls on campus. And so in your own way, and in a very big way, you are the next chapter, today's embodiment of the wonderful Downer legacy to Australia. Thank you. Behind every great man, there's a greater woman. And I'm not saying that because my wife is here, because she's not. But Nikki, you have been a big part of my life and a bigger part, of course, of Alexander's life. And the stories in this book, the successes of this book, are yours too. And so thank you for everything you've done for your family, for your friends, and ultimately for all of us and our country. Thank you, Nikki. I've got to mention Will, don't I? Because Will and I have the same haircut. As I say to Will, God only created a few perfect heads and the rest he put hair on. Will's a great Liberal, a great friend, a great lawyer, and obviously a great father and husband. So Will, thank you for being here too and everything you've done to support Georgina. Look, there are so many people who could say a few words tonight who were in Alexander's office, like Greg Hunt and Brad Haynes and Dave Windsor and Innes Willocks, and I'm probably missing others who are in the room. But I was only asked to speak tonight because I was Alexander Downer's tennis partner. But as a doubles partner, Alexander Downer made a wonderful foreign minister. And so it is a great honour to share a few words with you before we obviously have a more detailed discussion. And most importantly, not just hear from the man himself, hear from the esteemed author Tony Parkinson. Because the truth is, Winston Churchill was right. History will be kind to me because I intend to write it. And if we as Liberals do not tell our story, then we can bet that the other side will. And it will be an inaccurate one, and it will not reflect the truth, the facts of what had taken place. And so when I approached Alexander and said, "You've got to tell your story," he was a quick no, "I'm not doing it." And we all know how well he writes because he graces our pages on a daily basis or weekly basis. And he's a beautiful writer, an intelligent writer, a powerful writer. But he wouldn't do it. So we had to find the next best thing. And we found it in Tony Parkinson. And Tony, we'll hear from you in a moment, but you have done a brilliant job. You've even convinced a Labor historian, Troy Bramston, to say it's a great book. So thank you for doing this. You put your heart and soul into it. As you can see, this is a meaty tome. This book is from go to woe, explaining the ins and outs, the ups, the downs, the positives, the negatives, the facts, the stories of one of the most consequential periods in Australian foreign policy and the life and times of our greatest foreign minister. And as our greatest Prime Minister outside Sir Robert Menzies, John Howard, says in the foreword to this book, Alexander Downer was not just our longest serving foreign minister, he was our best foreign minister. And his time, nearly 12 years in office, with Peter Costello, one of only two ministers to hold the same portfolio for the duration of the Howard government. His time in office was defined by a sense of purpose, by a sense of public commitment to service, by a sense of patriotism and a love of our country, by a sense of deeply held values and conviction. And not just to do what might be politically expedient at the time, but to do what was right. And if you look at the events that Alexander Downer steered Australia's foreign policy ship through, they are really the most important and significant events that we have seen in the post-war Australia era. Bougainville, the Solomon Islands, the independence for East Timor, and of course 9/11. And what I saw up close when I worked with Alexander Downer was that he didn't need the title Australia First, he was Australia First. And everything was through the lens. In fact, I remember his white paper was called The National Interest, because everything was through the lens of what was in the national interest. And these were tumultuous times. Our nearest and largest neighbour is Indonesia, a country of more than 200 million people, and we've got Bill and Nick and other distinguished people who have forgotten more about Indonesia than I've ever known. But the fact is, when Alexander was Foreign Minister, he and John Howard dealt with 5 presidents from Indonesia, starting with Suharto, and then Habibie, and then Wahid, and then Megawati Sukarno Putri, and then SBY. And at that time, the independence of East Timor was no guaranteed thing. And I remember visiting East Timor with you, and of course people like Peter Cosgrove and others played critical roles. But these were no given things. And through Alexander Downer's stewardship, Australia got through some very difficult times with its nearest and most important neighbour, Indonesia, let alone bringing peace and independence to East Timor, as well as, of course, the more difficult issues of Bougainville and the Solomon Islands. He did, however, make some bad decisions, and I probably had a hand in some of them, including one we both now regret, Australia's signature of the International Criminal Court. And I think Greg is there, he was also to blame, right? But at least Alexander Downer has the sense of self to today. Say he wouldn't take that decision. He wouldn't have signed up to the Rome Statute, knowing that it's literally become a political arm of those who do not have Australia's national interests at heart. The events of 9/11 are detailed in this book, but of course they are enormously significant, and they're very current to today's state of the world. And I remember that night, the night of the Twin Towers, because I was staying in the electorate of Mayo at a bed and breakfast called Nan and Ted's, who had the best eggs, but not for me, no bacon. And we stayed there, and late at night, it was probably 10 o'clock or so, I was watching TV and I saw the first plane go in. And so in those days, there was no mobile phones. My first call was to the Downer household, and Nikki answered the phone. And I said, Nikki, please get Alexander, turn on the TV. And as they turned on the TV, the second plane went into the tower. And I heard more than one expletive from the other end of the phone. And I rushed over to the Downers' home. And if you remember, John Howard was in the United States at the time. And John Anderson was the acting Prime Minister. And they couldn't connect at that time with John Howard. And Alexander was effectively steadying the Australian ship. And he got on to John Anderson. They worked out that they needed to get the National Security Committee together. And it was Alexander, as John Howard admits, who recommended to him that they invoke the ANZUS alliance. And then the rest is history. But all those amazing stories are documented in the book. The other thing I wanted to mention, because it was a big part of my learning and my living with Alexander, which was the role that he played as a local member in Mayo. He was unbelievably committed, Alexander was, to his local electorate. And you might remember he had a close shave in 1998 with, I think, a member of the Red Gum band, John Schumann, and it was too close for comfort. So in 2001, we decided that we were going to apply ourselves in the electorate. And Alexander, in a souped-up Commodore, would race around the electorate. At that stage, after 9/11, he had federal police in his tow. He would lose them around the bends. And he would say to me always, all politics is local. And the way he applied himself at the local wineries, not on the liquor, of course, at the local RSLs, at all the local events, Alexander was first and foremost a local member. And that was a great learning for me. The last thing I just wanted to say, and Georgina rightly mentioned, how our country has changed last night, and it's not for the better. What has taken place in Bondi was all too predictable, and the warning signs were there for everyone to see. Because for the last 2.5 years, our leadership, political and civil, federal and state, has tolerated the intolerable. And the consequence of that has been an escalation in hate, in violence, in harassment, directed predominantly towards the Jewish community of Australia. A community that's been here since the arrival of the First Fleet. And our greatest citizen soldier, our first Governor General, our scientists, our philanthropists, our business leaders and others have come from a relatively small community. And it's a reminder that politics matters, that leadership matters. And when I woke up this morning, my first call was to John Howard. And I had written a statement overnight and I wanted to read it to John. And he said I wouldn't change a word. And I said to him that if he was in charge, and if Alexander was in charge, our country would not be experiencing what it is experiencing today. So, if there is one message out of this amazing legacy of quite a remarkable man, it's that when he was at the helm, Australia was a better country. Australia was a safer country. And we can't give up on that. The Liberal Party is at a low ebb. But the Liberal Party, as Alexander Downer always knew, was a vehicle to express our values and our ideas and our beliefs in a way that services every Australian. So please, look at this book, not just as a reflection on the past. Look at it as a roadmap for the future. Because the values and the beliefs and the conviction and the sense of self and the national interest and the patriotism and the commitment to public service of Alexander Downer is exactly what we need today. And if we don't have it, we'll have another event like last night and our country will continue its downward spiral. So Alexander, you are a great friend. You are a great Liberal. But most importantly of all, you are a great Australian and we're forever in your debt. Thank you.
That's a brilliant speech, Josh. Well, it's been a very tough day for you and a tough day for all of us. I can only begin by offering my own heartfelt love and support, and I'm sure the support of everyone here, for Josh and the Jewish community of Australia on the devastating events of the past 24 hours in this country. We gather this evening under a shadow of deep sadness. Tonight was to launch a book about an era of Australian foreign policy that was driven by consistency of principle and purpose, about a Foreign Affairs Minister who understood that protecting the freedoms, the prosperity and the sense of security Australians enjoyed at home required that we also represent those same values in our dealings with the wider world. That we stand up for the rule of law, for democratic freedoms, including freedom of worship, and that we reject, repudiate and resist those who seek to achieve their political aims through the use of terror or violent extremism. We'll get back to that story soon enough, but today we all share in a sickening feeling that something we have treasured has been lost on Bondi Beach, of all places. So as Josh has said, none of us can pretend we were not warned about the toxic tidal wash of anti-Semitism sweeping across this country. And we have seen failures of leadership, and we need to call that out. Alexander, when the Australian government signalled about 3 months ago that it intended to support a vote for Palestinian statehood at the UN, he went out publicly to issue a warning. For with war still raging in Gaza, what did this decision represent, if not a reward for Hamas and its extremist supporters? Alexander said this, and I'm quoting from page 297 of the book. This is a huge change in Australia's historic position in foreign policy. We've gone from supporting a Liberal Democratic government under siege from a terrorist organisation to supporting that terrorist organisation and opposing the Liberal Democratic state. This is an extraordinary thing for Australia to have done. In a way, it is the worst foreign policy decision Australia has made since the Second World War. In his view, one effect of the degradation of Australia's support for Israel would be to embolden those who are subjecting Australia's Jewish communities to harassment, violence and vilification. I cite this not as some sort of I told you so exercise, rather as to make the point that wise heads like Alexander were sounding this warning to the Prime Minister, the Foreign Affairs Minister Penny Wong and to others. Can't hear me? I'm standing back. Okay, sorry. Is that better? Okay. So he's making the point, I'm making the point that wise heads like Alexander were sounding this warning to the Prime Minister and to Foreign Affairs Minister Penny Wong. This path you have chosen is reckless and dangerous. You need to listen before it's too late. Alexander was doing this directly, robustly, in plain and unambiguous language. This has been a standout feature of his entire career in public life. And so to this book on the life and times of Alexander Downer. I much appreciate Robert Menzies Institute and Georgina for hosting this event. It's a very impressive turnout. I thank all of you for being with us tonight. Having said that, I'm pretty sure that not so many of you came along to listen to me prattle on. I'm privileged to be speaking alongside Josh and Alexander. So let me just provide a quick debrief on how this book came about. It's a book that could and maybe should have been written 10 or 15 years ago. Alexander could and probably should have written the book himself. As we know from his long career in public life, and we can judge from his newspaper columns and his regular slots on Sky, he's a talented communicator, a sharp wit, and a person of forceful opinions. And he has a treasure trove of highly illuminating anecdotes about his interactions over many years with people in power here and overseas. I've set some of this out in the prologue to the book. Alexander's recollections provide vivid detail on some of the landmark moments and some of the critical emerging trends defining the early 21st century. The September 11 terror attacks and their aftermath, a resurgent or assertive China, this fragmentation of politics we're seeing in many Western democracies, including our own, the return of Russian expansionism in Europe, the challenges of political instability and upheaval facing small nation states in the island chains to our north. And as already mentioned, the forlorn attempts across all those years to broker a lasting and sustainable peace in the Middle East. Yet for all that wealth of knowledge and experience, Alexander didn't have much inclination when he left the Parliament to sit down and to write a memoir. Whenever I asked him, it was a sort of a scowl and a grunt about I couldn't imagine anything worse. But here's one thing worse, Alexander, I could write it. Personally, I think it's a pity. It's worth that didn't happen. It's worth reminding ourselves that by the end of his political career, Alexander had become by far Australia's longest-serving Foreign Minister, surpassing Doc Everett and Richard Casey. Almost 12 years in the job. That adds up to a lot of experience and insights into the workings of global politics, unmatched in so many ways. It's a vast body of work. Just over a year ago, Josh and I had a chat about this. We thought it would be a shame if this story was left untold. So with the upcoming 30th anniversary of the election of the first Howard government, it's perhaps as good a time as any to reflect on what that government achieved in the foreign policy sphere. So at the urging of Josh and some very other supportive people, I took on the project. What I set out to achieve in this book was an upfront account of Alexander's distinctive contribution to our national life and to our standing internationally, both as a nation and as a people. It's not a vanilla monologue. You'll find the book documents criticisms of Alexander's policy decisions, his judgment calls, and those times when his slightly outrageous sense of humour got him into terrible trouble. As he once told me, you should speak to people who don't like me too, they won't be hard to find. I also hope this book brings a view from the inside on how the world of diplomacy works and where and when it has failed that many readers may not have seen or heard before. It tracks critical decisions on momentous issues like deployments to Iraq, Afghanistan, East Timor, Bougainville, the Solomons, and how Alexander navigated successfully through some very testing moments with Indonesia, our largest and nearest neighbour in Southeast Asia. I've been guided by the observations of those involved in many of these crunch decisions. Chief among them, of course, is John Howard, and I thank him for his invaluable contribution. Could I also call out in particular Josh, Greg Hunt, Bill Farmer, Nick Warner, and Chris Kenny, and all the others who helped enormously along the way. I thank Georgina and the archivists at the University of South Australia for providing a window into Alexander's upbringing and the family traditions that led to his early embrace of a career in public life. And to Nikki Downer for her starring role in some of the standout anecdotes in the book. Clearly, it would be pretty much a hollow exercise to attempt this book without Alexander's direct and unflinching input about decisions or outcomes, good or bad. He's provided answers to any questions I've raised with his own reflections, observations and arguments. He's done so openly and true to form, forthrightly. Alexander was very generous with his time, given he was in Europe or the US during much of this process. He's kept himself busy since leaving Parliament, including his diplomacy for the UN in Cyprus, his stint as Australia's High Commissioner to the UK, and most recently as a Distinguished Fellow at the Hoover Institution at Stanford, alongside former US Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice. He's very much stayed in the play, his finger on the pulse, all of which has added to an enormous bank of knowledge. So the challenge for me was to explore and explain in some depth Alexander's often quite unique perspectives on why events in the world unfolded as they did and why things are happening the way they are now. I won't take you through chapter and verse of the book tonight, other than to assure you there's a lot of fresh and revealing detail in each of the chapters, including one on Alexander's somewhat turbulent history with President Donald Trump. I think one advantage of this book being published today, and not all those years earlier, is that it can offer a more considered, longer-range perspective. Alexander can discuss judgments now that he might not have been as comfortable discussing quite as openly at the time. He can be very candid, that's in his nature. John Howard talks about that in the book. He liked Alexander a lot, for several reasons. Loyalty and a strong shared sense of conviction were obviously important to him. But another of Alexander's qualities, as John Howard puts it, was that Downer was always game to say what others were not. People may agree or disagree with some elements of the narrative in this book and question some of the judgment calls. I'll leave that to others to decide, but I'm happy to accept full accountability. I've decided what is covered, I provided the background and the context, and I've chosen the themes. So where there are gaps or deficiencies, they're down to me. I thank Anthony Capello and his team at Connor Court for bringing this book to print. It was great to have one of Australia's leading independent publishers take on the project. For my part, this was my second go at a political biography, after a book on Jeff Kennett way back in 2000. Different people, obviously, different tier of government, different policy choices. What the books have in common, and the reason I enjoyed the work, is that both guys, of course, became big, bold voices in the politics of this country. They generated lots of headlines, positive and negative, but they also got a lot done, despite some of the challenges being very difficult politically. When I think of Alexander's biggest policy achievements, I think the reset of relations with modern democratic Indonesia was certainly one of them, not least because of the tremors generated by the East Timor intervention and the Bali bombings. The big step up in the operating rhythms of the US alliance, post-September 11, was another. Less obvious, but also highly significant, was the development of much closer security ties with Japan. That's a fascinating story, and it has particular resonance within the Downer family. Balancing the relationships with the US and China was another massive challenge. Having Presidents George W. Bush and Hu Jintao address joint sittings of the Australian Parliament on consecutive days in 2003 was probably the high watermark. That juggling act remains perhaps the biggest strategic challenge for Australians today, and Alexander has strong views on how this very complex equation has to be managed. It's not getting any easier, and that is explored in some detail in several chapters of the book. So with that teaser, I thank you all for being with us tonight for the launch of a book that was a long time coming. I'm hoping at least some of you will find it worth the wait. Thank you.
All I want to do is thank everybody who's spoken and been involved with this project. It's like sitting through your own funeral. People say nice things about you then, I'm told. But this is a bit of a foretaste of what I can look forward to from my cloud in the sky. Josh has been the inspiration for this project, and as you can obviously tell, it's a bit of an emotional relationship with Josh. He's sort of like a son to us. That's why we feel so strongly about what has happened in the last 24 hours, you know. Just shocking. I've always been what I think you would describe as a liberal, not just a capital L liberal, obviously I'm that, but a small L liberal, somebody who believes in individual freedom, the dignity of individuals, and abhors discrimination against people on the basis of their innate characteristics. So that has, for me, been, if you like, a guiding principle. And the Liberal Party has embodied that when it's working well, and when it's fighting for those principles. And they are part of what makes, if you like, modern Australia. Australia has been a model of a liberal society, a tolerant and decent country. And I just thought last night that was shattered. That was shattered. And we have a huge challenge as a country to rebuild our liberalism in Australia. And I would like to think that the Liberal Party would have a really central role to play in that task. I'd like to think that, and that is the challenge for the Liberal Party ahead of it. That's all I want to say about that, and I know there's going to be a Q&A session here. I just want to thank not just Josh and Tony and everybody who has worked on this project for putting together a very positive picture of me, honestly. When I read the manuscript of this book, I didn't even recognise myself. I mean, I have so many faults, and Georgina and Nikki know all about them. I have so many flaws and failings, and most of them are not in the book. So that's a very good thing. And I want to thank them, you know, above all Nikki, my wife, who has had to endure the ups and downs of politics and at the same time bringing up 4 children. Georgina is the oldest of them, then there's Olivia and Edward and Henrietta. Nikki has been absolutely brilliant in bringing them all up. They've turned out okay, right? They've turned out okay. Well, Bill's not so sure, but that's a great tribute to Nikki, and she's also been a wonderful support for me and hugely popular in the electorate. I mean, I don't think I would have ever got elected if it had just been me. But when you added in Nikki and the children, because we took the children around to electoral functions so people would take pictures of the darling little things rather than of me. And then Josh, of course, who was absolutely brilliant in the electorate as well as he was in his own electorate in subsequent years. But Nikki did an absolutely fantastic job. And the children were always, for me, a great joy when I occasionally came home. There they all were, all 4 little things, school fees to pay. Can you imagine paying for 4 children at independent schools on a parliamentary salary? Can you imagine that? No wonder I made so many trips. Get it? No, I'm only kidding. That's all I want to say. Again, thank you very much, Tony, for all the work you've put into this book. And I hope those of you who read it, as long as you buy it, that's the main thing. Whether you read it or not is immaterial. But I hope you very much enjoy it. And finally, I wish you all a very Merry Christmas, or as I've been in the United States recently, they like to say Happy Holidays. Happy Holidays. I find that really offensive, actually. It annoys me. I'm a Christian, and so I like Christmas. So thank you very much for coming along.
Dad, I thought I would start with you. We did record a podcast before, and I had some questions I didn't get to. And one of them was your biggest regret as Foreign Minister, because there's been a lot of praise, but there were some gaffes. I mean, opposition leader was replete. But as Foreign Minister, where would you have, if you had your time again, done it differently?
Actually, it's a pathetic thing to say, really, that I don't have any regrets. Well, there are things, surely things we could have done better. I mean, some of my former colleagues here, Bill Farmer, Nick Warner, to name but 2. So I worked with them on a whole series of issues of Papua New Guinea, Indonesia, Solomon Islands, and they probably can tell you ways I could have done it better. I was sometimes quite brutal with people in telling them the facts of life. But I don't have any particular policy regrets. I regret that we lost the 2007 election. And there was a role I played, which was to discuss with my cabinet colleagues whether John Howard should stand down
for Peter Costello as the Prime Minister in that period, sort of September 2007. And the election, you might recall, was in November. My cabinet colleagues but they didn't all, thought John Howard should stand down because we were doomed to lose the election and people were tired of the Howard government. And we didn't know how Peter Costello would go, but it was worth a try. And in the end, I went to see John Howard and to deliver that message to him. It was at Kirribilli House at 9 o'clock one night. I mean, I went around there. He and Jeanette were there. This is just between us. And it was reasonably late at night, after 9 o'clock. And I would have thought, if it was just the three of us, they'd offer you a drink, wouldn't you? Do you know what they offered me? A cup of bloody tea. A cup of tea. That was it. A cup of tea. We sat round and had a cup of tea. And they had obviously decided that the only way John Howard would stand down would be if we forced him to. And my judgment was that if we forced him out, a great and heroic Prime Minister of this country, somebody who'd done an astonishingly good job, I would say the second best Prime Minister in our history. I think this man Menzies was our greatest Prime Minister. But if we forced him out of office, the Liberal voting electorate would never forgive us for doing that. And so I think we made the right decision. So I'm not really saying regret. I think we made the right decision to keep him on and sail off the cliff, which we knew we were going to do. But I tell you that story and answers that question. Maybe the alternative was to force John Howard out and install Peter Costello. But I still think with that counterfactual, we would have lost the election. It's hard to know, but I think we would have.
Josh, you worked for Dad for 4 years and then John Howard for another 2 years before embarking on a great career as a jackaroo. What did you learn from those two politicians that you took into Kooyong and then, of course, your journey to the Treasurer's position?
Well, the first thing I just want to say too, because you know Greg and Brad and Innes and others and Dave are in this office, in this room tonight, is there was amazing camaraderie within Alexander's office, and he did not throw ashtrays at us like a previous foreign minister, but he did ridicule us from time to time. So an often one with me was, Josh, English must be your second language because you're so bad at communicating with him.
Be forensic.
Yeah, be forensic. But what I took from all of that was the importance of building resilience. And Alexander, as you know, had some low points in his career. And he bounced back. I mean, being a leader of the party for that short period and, you know, the great duo which was seen as Alexander and Peter Costello, and then to lose that position, then to become Foreign Minister and then to become Australia's longest serving Foreign Minister is amazing resilience, I think. And so I learnt from watching Alexander close up the importance the importance of taking those knocks and bouncing straight back up, right? The old saying, smooth seas never made for skilled sailors. You're no good at what you do if it's all easy along the way. So I learnt that from Alexander. Alexander had an amazing work ethic. And I know, you know, your other colleagues in the room too, like David Kemp and Richard Alston and others who are great successes in their own rights. But I saw firsthand from Alexander how hard he worked at getting across the detail in his portfolio, preparing for meetings, taking those meetings seriously. And so that was another really important takeout for me. And then, of course, I think we all said in our words earlier is that Alexander had a sense of conviction, right? He had a North Star. He knew where he was going. And that makes politics easy because it's not all about chopping and changing and testing the wind, where the wind is blowing. And so just by osmosis, if you like, being close to the action, seeing how hard he worked on his portfolio, seeing how much he loved the little stuff in his electorate, which he treated as big stuff on the foreign affairs stage, and you know he had a great sense of public service. He does have a great sense of public service. And the last thing I just want to say is, not unlike other politicians in the room, former politicians in the room, and John Howard and others, Alexander's continued to play a very public, prominent, consequential role after politics. Whether that's chairing the Policy Exchange in the UK, whether it's the work with the Hoover Institution, whether it's putting pen to paper on a regular basis, he is front and centre in the battle of ideas today. And I think that's a great thing, Alexander, that you continue to do. Not only is I'm sure it's interesting for you, but it's certainly beneficial for all of us.
And Tony, you obviously didn't go into politics, but you came at this with a journalist's eye. What would you say was the biggest lesson you learned in the Downer office, aside from being forensic and
Yeah, we learned about being forensic.
your haircut and...
I also learned to look up the word galoot, because I got that a few times. Galoot. Yeah. Well, you're obviously coming from one side of the door or the desk, so to speak, to the other. So it was a fascinating transition to make. I went initially as a media advisor, which meant I was just dealing with journos essentially. It wasn't a particularly controversial time around then, but then I moved across to do some policy stuff in East Asia and stuff like that. So that was, Alexander's. Remember, at that time I joined I joined in 2005. So Alexander by that time was, to put it this way, he was in his full pomp as foreign minister. He knew absolutely everything. He didn't really need a media advisor. He almost certainly didn't need he didn't need an East Asia advisor. He didn't need really anybody, but he had, he knew all the people, he knew all the contours of the debate, and he was across all the territory. So I'm sure I learned a lot from that. I'm not sure I taught him anything.
I should say one other thing you prompted me. The thing about Alexander is he never said no to an interview. Oh. Right? And too many politicians, pick and choose and avoid.
Josh, you're taunting me because I could start singing the song that he taught me.
Oh
no.
I'm a multimedia megastar. Always on the radio, sometimes on the TV. Libby and I are sort of age, 5 and 6.
Okay.
Taught that by Dad. Absolutely media obsessed. We have time for one micro question because it's definitely the hour. The Liberal Party's at a low point. It's obvious. We don't need to quibble. The 1980s, the Liberal Party was at a low point. In fact, the early 90s. I think Judith Brett, the historian of Robert Menzies in the Liberal Party, said she thought that the Liberal Party was doomed as a political party. Dad, you've been there before. Rock bottom. Your leadership of the Liberal Party was sort of definitive of it. What can the 2025 Liberals learn from the experience of the 80s and early 90s?
Good question.
Yeah, well, so, by the way, I have the highest rating that any Liberal leader has ever had, and until recently I had the lowest rating as well. No reflection on anyone else, but others have plumbed the depth. So when I first became an MP, that was the 1984 election, the Liberal Party was really struggling. I mean, I don't think it was quite as unpopular as it is now, but it was pretty unpopular. And everyone was sort of rooting for Labor and Bob Hawke and so on. There was a great debate within the Liberal Party about what it stood for, and there was a great fight in the Liberal Party, which was sometimes interpreted as the wets versus the dries, which was, doesn't bear any description now because it would take a long time to explain what that actually meant. But the party debated internally its direction, not what the polling said, but what it stood for. And eventually it, if you like, it worked it out. And it was often a very painful process. People lost pre-selections in, various seats, including here in Victoria. One of the victors I can see sitting pretty much in front of me there. It was an existential battle, which was finally resolved. John Hewson became the leader of the Liberal Party. He was responsible for putting together the fight back policy. And whatever you say about it, it gave the Liberal Party a real cause to fight for. And it had the courage to fight for its convictions, having resolved what its convictions were. And so I would say the lesson for the Liberal Party today is to redefine itself, to explain to the public, including to young people, what liberalism really is and what it stands for, number one. Number two, on the basis of its liberal principles, small L, liberal principles, to be prepared to apply them to policy demands of the day, and to do that every day of the week. And number three, to have the courage to fight for their convictions. Too often, I hate to say this, but too often in recent times, the Liberal Party has shown a lack of conviction and a lack of courage to fight for its convictions. I want to see the Liberal Party fight for the things that it thinks are right for this country. And if they're not very popular, make them popular. Go out and persuade the public that what the Liberal Party wants to do will be in the country's best interest. Don't just do the polling. That's what they've been doing in the past. Have a bit of courage. The great leaders of the Liberal Party, people like Howard, Menzies, of course, and let me include in that list Malcolm Fraser. These were people of huge courage, amongst other things, huge courage, and I'd like to see a lot more courage coming out of the Liberal Party.
Well said. This is the close now of the formal part of our evening. Thank you so much for joining us for this launch tonight. It's been a difficult 24 hours in our nation, and I do appreciate you all turning out. And it's been, I think, particularly wonderful to have Josh here too. As a Jewish leader, you had to. I can't imagine what strength you had to draw on to come here tonight, and you've done that for us, and I'm so grateful. Thank you. please continue to enjoy a glass of bubbles or buy the book. And a final plug. We have our Christmas fundraising campaign. We are a charity. All donations are tax deductible. It would be remiss of me not to remind you, if you haven't already supported us this campaign, to do so. We really do appreciate this support that enables us to continue to do things like tonight. Thank you. Merry Christmas.